Hey, Brian and Kevin in the lab today, and we're looking at this Supermicro server. This is our first one with P-cores.
Yes, Granite Rapids.
Yeah, so when Intel launched Xeon 6, they did it in two phases, right? The first thrust was all E-core systems, efficiency cores only, with the P-cores to come, but it's been quite some time. I think we saw our very first efficiency core systems right before mid-May.
I want to say it feels like last year, but anything is last year from now.
Pretty much was last year. And when Intel launched the Xeon 6 with efficiency cores, the industry collectively sighed, right? It wasn't really that exciting.
It was a strange launch. Usually when we see more cores, more new CPUs, it's always like, okay, it's competing head-to-head with like Intel versus AMD.
Oh yeah, you see the two flagships.
Yes.
AMD goes core heavy, then Intel, and then they alternate back and forth. That's why the E-cores was such a weird thing.
Yes, the E-core, it was a, look at what it compares to from a processor 3 generations ago.
Well, and that was the marketing, right? Because when we got the briefings and started to see what Intel was looking at, they were positioning the E-core as a replacement to exactly what you were saying, like 8200s. Yeah, right. And so, and I guess they're not wrong, right? Because if you look at the 8280, for instance, good CPU, actually one of the better ones, I think, from our testing in that era, right?
Well, yeah, and the reason those were coming about is you have servers that have been out there for probably 5 years or so now. Maybe you're fine with the performance, you're just trying to get something modern, new warranty, etc., and that's where it kind of slots in. But it was a really strange launch where everything gets faster and denser, and this was it's up there.
Yeah,
a lot of cores.
It's really good if you want middle pack performance, but if you want a lot of cores, it had 144. And so from a consolidation play, I think that was the big thing, is take all your old servers, put these E-cores in there, you'll still get all your cores, you'll be able to take 4 servers down to 1 or 2, and there's efficiencies, rack density gains, power efficiency.
Power is a big point.
Right. So all of that aside, it's just now that we're seeing the Granite Rapids CPUs come out.
Yes, and we've gotten our first one in. It is a single socket, and it's smoking fast.
Yeah, and this is really kind of interesting. So Supermicro, as you all know, will make systems for literally everything. And this one is an interesting blend of the Granite Rapids P-core processor inside, just one, a mixture of backplane options and a couple riser options we'll get into. But this is very sturdy, very powerful, but it's still kind of mid-range with the backplane options for storage and some of the other things going on in here.
Well, yeah, this single socket limits how many PCIe lanes to go around.
Right.
So it was interesting. We got this thing in right after we shipped back a workstation build that looked identical to this.
Yeah, well, I mean, Supermicro is always good at making parts somewhat universal, which makes sense. When you have 8 billion SKUs, you don't want to have thousands of different risers in the back. They want to be similar to make it easy to be flexible in design.
And we'll see some of this, some of that inside.
So we've told you that it's a Granite Rapids server. I haven't given you the part number, and that's because I can't keep them all straight. So I've got a cheat sheet here. This is the Hyper SuperServer SYS-212HA-TN. Basically, 2U server, single processor with a lot of flexibility inside. And where do you want to start? You want to rip the lid and get after this thing, or talk about storage first?
We can talk about the front. It has 8 of the U.2 NVMe bays, so really high performance storage in the front, although you're not going to find a lot of density. This server can go up to 24 bays, but it ends up being a SATA SAS configuration, not NVMe. Although most people, if you're buying NVMe, you can top out at some pretty large capacities. So
it is Gen 5 still.
Yeah.
So you can, Micron, for instance, offers a 61.44 terabyte Gen 5 drive, right?
Yeah, Solidigm's moved up to the 122.
Yeah, Solidigm's got the 122. If you want QLC, it's a Gen 4, but obviously still works in the Gen 5 slot. But you are, as Kevin says, limited to 8 NVMe drives. Just depends. Like, we're storage guys, so we'd like more. But in the design of the system with the single CPU, in the lane allocation, as we'll see when we tear this open, we've got to look at the back as well. There's only so much that can be done without switches and retimers.
Yeah, you're going to end up with a PCIe switch, and most people don't want to deal with those because then you lower your overall bandwidth of each individual drive, adds complexity, cost, and if you don't need it, it's something that you don't really want to include into the platform.
That's where we come back to this server, is it's powerful with that Granite Rapids CPU, but it's also a little bit, it's not limited, it's just specific in what it can do. It's specific in what it can do, and if you want a giant storage server, that's not going to be this one, because it would be kind of crazy to do that with SATA drives, and SAS is kind of on the way out at this point. You would do it with NVMe. So let's focus on the 8 NVMe drives you've got. The only thing that I would have liked to have seen would be an E3S option, and that's not currently one of the 2 backplanes they support for storage.
Yeah, although I suppose if you go that direction, not all the high capacity drives are on E3S, and at least right now, from what we've seen, there's still a lot of options for you on U.2.
Yeah, there are plenty of U.2 options, plenty of Gen 5 options. E3S is a little bit more limited, but a lot of brands in the storage industry that make drives are only doing Gen 5 on their E3S. So we're sort of at a weird transition area at the moment. Let's go ahead and crack this open. As we said, it's a 2U chassis, of course, with a single processor. So one of the first things you'll notice is that with a single CPU, this is pretty Spartan inside. There's a lot of empty space.
Yes, and well, so there's empty space, although you have 2 M.2 banks for boot drives, massive heatsink, and this guy's rated for, I think, a 500 watt TDP.
500 watt air cooled, which is the important note from this configuration.
Yes, right? And there is a air cowl that goes on top. For visibility, I took it off just so you can see this.
So we've got a 6980p inside, which is the top end of the Granite Rapids SKU list. That's a 500 watt TDP chip, as you said. And then the support Supermicro has for the CPU scales down. They've got lower TDP chips and lower core chips, and TDPs that go down to 400 watts with 96 cores.
Yeah, and the P-core CPUs do support hyper-threading. The E-core models don't, although 144 cores, single socket, 2-socket, 288 cores. Do you really want more hyper-threaded cores?
VMware would say yes.
Possible, yeah. Licensing gets you.
Right, and specific to the core, we're not going to rip off the heatsink and show you, but it is a different socket in the Sierra versus Granite Rapids.
Yeah, the 6800 CPUs leverage a larger footprint socket. 6700E CPUs a little bit smaller, so you're not going to be able to take a CPU from one side to the other and plop them in.
Which makes it kind of challenging for system designers, because not that it's impossible, but they like as few parts as possible, and now you've got to have boards for E and boards for P.
In past generations that we've looked at different server vendors, you'll have, hey, it supports Intel, or hey, it supports AMD in this generation, and you can pick and choose any of the variants in between. This, you are stuck with that motherboard, and you can't upgrade to a new CPU even midway. It's a completely different platform.
So we got the 6 fans up front, user replaceable, kind of standard issue Supermicro fans here.
I always like taking them out there. It's always fun.
Demonstrating them. Yes, they are hot swappable. Congratulations. We've got the giant heatsink here for the 500 watt chip, which we talked about. I'm sure they'll sell you a liquid kit if you want that in this server. They've got a ton of liquid infrastructure. And then we've got 12 DIMM slots, DDR5 flanking the CPU. This will support up to 3 terabytes of DDR5.
Yes, we did not get 3 terabytes.
We did get fully populated, though, which is a bonus when we get these reviews.
32 gig DIMMs, 384 gig of memory total, but a nice footprint for our workloads.
Oh yeah, that's a very reasonable memory footprint these days. As we come through the back of the system, obviously we'll talk about the risers and power in a bit. Anything else on the board stand out to you?
A lot of power connections for GPU, your AI workloads. Although if you have it as a rack mount workstation, there's some versatility there as well, although you might have a different CPU inside of it, but a lot of options. What's interesting though is as you go towards the back, you start to see how many different options this chassis or configuration can handle.
And there's actually, this is one point on the risers, there are 2 configurations. There's our configuration, I think, which has a double wide support, but there's also one that just has 2 single slots.
Yeah, so as we look in here, there's a sticker over it. The PCIe cable is required to enable this slot.
Okay.
There's additional fittings on here, and a lot of this is going to come down to where you want your PCIe lanes. And right now, I think we're probably using up to the maximum number of lanes that this CPU can support with the front mount NVMe and then the PCIe configuration in the rear. But there's a lot of different ways where you can change things. And then even for the OCP card slot, you have a by 16 cable going to the rear slot. And this supports a ton of different options, everywhere from a dual 10 gig card up to, I think, a 200 gig card.
Yeah, they support 200 officially, but we know there's 400 gig cards out from Broadcom, so they're cruising along. So that's great. What's in this riser here?
This riser would be more where you put your GPU if you
full
stuck
size,
one in here.
right?
Yeah, it's full-size bay, and the way it's set up, it looks like it'd support 2 double-width GPUs.
It's got your distances for your GPUs too?
Yes, although as you can see, there's a ton of space in the front where you just stick out.
For your extra long
Yes.
GPUs, your extended GPUs?
Yeah, we didn't get any of the power cables to connect up to the GPUs, but a lot of different options there, so it just depends on where you want to take this particular build.
Although the power cables could be in the accessory box, which we rarely check.
I did check it; they were not in there.
Okay. If you want the cables, they exist. You can hook it up. You talked about the they call it the AIOM slot that supports OCP3. So we've got that. Onboard management is still here per standard Supermicro server.
Yeah, you'll have your onboard management, so you don't have to dedicate a LAN port.
And it's worth noting that Supermicro has a number of other software packages like Super Cloud Composer. They've got some other management tools, so they've got other flexibility for systems management, which is particularly useful in quantities of more than one. So,
yes, this is just one server.
So then the last thing back here are the power supplies. We've talked a lot about the 500. What are you doing over there?
They're very firmly inserted.
Firmly. So we talked about 500 watts on the CPU if you're running 15 to 25 on your SSDs and more in your GPU if you put that in. Power is an important consideration.
These are 120 or 240 power supplies. It appears that they'll do 1,000 on 120 or 1,600 each on 240. So
good coverage for a system of this nature,
yeah,
right?
Definitely.
All right, so what you're dying to know about, I'm sure, is the performance of this processor, the 6980P with its 128 cores versus the 144 core E-core systems. We had a single socket and a dual socket in the E-core. Compared it to this to give you some flavor of what all these systems look like.
For single thread performance and a lot of workloads, this thing ran laps around the E-core CPUs.
Which is what you would expect, right? Yeah. So more cores can help in some workloads, but in more intensive ones, the P-cores really come out ahead.
The core performance in a Granite Rapids CPU is far greater than anything you're going to find on the Sierra 4 side, although it's designed to be like that.
Sure. Let's take a look at the performance tables. They're in the review on StorageReview.com. We'll link to that in the description, so you can check out that for more detail. We've got all the CPU support and all the other configuration information. But what stands out in terms of the performance? And we're really just looking at CPU and memory at this point.
Yeah.
We didn't do much storage and we didn't put a GPU in there, but just on the CPU side.
Yeah, so on our first test blender, there were certain advantages for the cores. This one, there was the area for Monster that did take advantage of the 280 cores in the dual socket each platform. Now as we go towards other workloads, though, you start to see the single socket Granite Rapids platform far surpasses the Sierra Forest platform. So massive performance gains, which you're kind of expecting.
Well, I know Y-Cruncher is one that we routinely use to show CPU power, and what stands out to you here?
So this one's kind of interesting. It's almost funny in a way. You have the P-core CPU almost double the speed of a dual socket E-core platform.
So for intensive computational calculations, the P-cores really come through.
Yeah, and that's across the entire span of tests. So that difference, it's almost like 3x going from the single socket E-core platform to the single socket P-core. But yeah, across all of our tests, you're going to see huge performance gains from the much better single thread performance, but also translate into much higher multi-thread performance.
And so there's always a trade-off, though, in terms of the P versus the E. These are going to be a little more expensive, a little more power hungry.
Yeah.
And not all workloads need that kind of power.
Correct, but that's where it's nice to have options out there, especially if you're looking at a license-intensive application. You're going to have areas where maybe you don't want 144 or 288 cores, even if it gets you close on the performance metrics, because you're going to be charged on each of those cores. Even if they're lower performing cores, you're going to be charged on them.
And ultimately, it just depends on the workload. The P-cores are really great, as we've seen, but we deal with the top-end CPUs because we want to see what the best of the best is. In most deployments, there's not necessarily a need to have the 6980. You might drop down to a lower core count processor, even in this configuration, just to be more in line with your license needs, your user count, application count or whatever.
Yeah, your application may not need all those cores. Trim it back a little bit, but your single-threaded performance is still going to be really strong.
So we joke with Supermicro about having a billion SKUs for every need, but this is where that kind of flexibility comes in handy with not just P-cores and E-cores, but storage and slots in the back and how many OCP NICs do you want, and silicon diversity. Do you want Intel or do you want AMD or do you want, I guess, ARM even at this point, right? Or
pretty much any option you want to go with, there's a server for that.
And so this one, for its part, is really cool. We started out by calling it powerful, yet reserved in a way. It's not the dual proc, over-the-top 24 or 30 drive system with a bunch of slots for GPUs that's going to come in at 6 figures plus. But it's a little bit more, what's that word of the year last year? Demure? This is the demure version of the Granite Rapids system. Still plenty of power, don't get me wrong, but without the over-the-top expense that you would have in a more robust system.
No, not all platforms need, 4 GPU support. 2 could be sufficient.
Well, I mean, if your AI journey is not quite as demanding, I suppose.
Well, yes, and there's other platforms for those increased workloads.
Right. So we've got the full review up on the website. Like I said, it's linked in the description below. Check that out, like and subscribe, and tell a friend.